Hello there. Today I'm taking another look at a wine from the Kumeu River winery from the 2025 vintage. However, this is from their Kumeu Village range, which is their more entry-level range of wines, and actually this is from their Rays Road Vineyard in Hawke's Bay. Having tasted the wine, this is meant as an everyday drinking Pinot Noir. It's an unoaked style, and I was really impressed with the beautiful fresh fruit that this wine offered. I'm thinking about it, there's a small production wine from a high quality family owned estate. It's from a single location, their Rays Road estate. It's hand picked, it's been produced using an indigenous fermentation, and a lot of these are factors we look for in top quality Pinot Noirs and Burgundies. So is this the bargain we've all been looking for? So just to reprise the details about Kumeu River, the winery is located in Kumeu, just on the edge of town. It's about 25 kilometres northwest of the centre of Auckland, so we're towards the top of New Zealand's North Island here. The winery was founded in 1944. At that stage it was called San Marino, and this was the home of the Brajkovich family who'd come to New Zealand in the late 1930s, just before the Second World War, had worked hard, had saved money and bought this vineyard in West Auckland. Today Kumeu River are particularly known for producing elegant, high quality Burgundy-style Chardonnay that has gained some real critical acclaim, particularly their single vineyard expressions. The current generation of the Brajkovich family, running the estate of 4 siblings, so Michael, Paul, Milan and Mariana Brajkovich. Now the family were faced with the fact that as Kumeu becomes more of a sort of a suburb of Auckland, there was little or no prospect of being able to expand their vineyard holdings in and around Kumeu itself. So in 2017 they took a completely different route and purchased the Rays Road Vineyard, which is in the Hawke's Bay region on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand. This was a vineyard that had originally been planted in 2008 and had been set up as a joint venture between somebody called Pascal Jolivet, who's a Frenchman who produces wine in Sancerre, really Fumé, and also makes a bit of wine in South Africa, I believe, and Trinity Hill, who are a well-known New Zealand producer from the Hawke's Bay region. And it's noted that at that stage, this vineyard was planted with what were seen as superior clones. So from the outset, they aimed to produce high-quality fruit here. Interestingly, the vineyard is planted on a north-facing limestone hillside. The vineyard is a little further inland than most of Hawke's Bay's vineyard and is also at an altitude of 180 metres above sea level, helping to give something of a cooling influence to the climate here. The vineyard was planted with Pinot Noir, Chardonnay and with Sauvignon Blanc. Since its purchase by the Brajkoviches, they've been gradually removing the Sauvignon Blanc and replacing that with Chardonnay. Another important step was to remove the irrigation, so this is now a dry farmed vineyard. The wine is referred to as Kumeu Village, but in fact Kumeu itself is rapidly, as I say, expanding into an outer commuter suburb of Auckland. Now in 2025, 40% of all of Kumeu River's fruit for their wines came from Hawke's Bay, and I think that underlines the importance they now place on Rays Road as a source of fruit. But actually, since 2022, they haven't made a still Pinot Noir table wine from their vineyards around Auckland, preferring instead to use any Pinot Noir that is still planted there for sparkling wine, or a portion of it going into the Kumeu Village Pinot Noir. In the 2025 vintage, however, this is, I believe, the first vintage where the Kumeu Village Pinot Noir has been entirely sourced from the Rays Road Vineyard in Hawke's Bay. So as I say, the vineyard is entirely dry farmed, the soils are wind-blown loess over underlying limestone, and viticulture here is described as being sustainable. Now the 2025 vintage gave some outstanding quality to the fruit that was grown both in Kumeu and in Hawke's Bay. Particularly, there was an exceptionally dry harvest, so the fruit was entirely healthy when it was picked. There were beautiful aromas and a lovely flavour concentration, with the dry conditions and moderate yields contributing richness and texture to the wine. So the fruit was all hand-picked, that's clearly stated on the label. The fruit was also sorted at the vineyard before being transported to Kumeu for vinification. Transport was done in half-ton bins, referred to as nally bins, which were loaded onto trucks. It took about 7 hours to reach Kumeu. I talked about the planting of superior clones at Rays Road. Evidently, in 2025, the clones that actually made their way into the Village Pinot Noir included the Able clone, or gumboot clone as it's sometimes known, a premium Australian clone referred to as MV6. My understanding is the MV refers to mother vine and refers to a clone of Pinot Noir that was originally introduced to Australia by no less a person than James Busby. There was also fruit from a number of Dijon clones that went into this blend as well. And those were 777, 667 and 115. The majority of the fruit was destemmed, but evidently of the Able clone portion of the wines, about 30% of that was whole bunch fermented, which can be a way of giving a little more flavour complexity and a little more structure to the wine. So when that was included in the final blend, probably about 5% of the overall wine was whole bunch fermented. Fermentation was entirely done with indigenous yeasts and took place in temperature controlled stainless steel tanks with a gentle pumping over to ensure the extraction of colour, flavour and tannin from the skins. And that was carefully managed, probably starting out a couple of times a day, reducing as the fermentation went on. The wine underwent malolactic conversion and aged for 7 months in stainless steel tanks, so saw absolutely no oak during its maturation. Something which I think has ensured the freshness of the fruit character of this wine. There is also a note that says that this wine is vegan friendly, so in other words it won't have been fined in order to soften its tannin by the addition of milk or egg proteins. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we? As usual for a Pinot Noir, I've got it in a nice big Pinot glass. This is a Raydel New World Pinot Noir glass. Looking at the colour, this is really quite a vibrant but pale ruby red, almost sort of cherry red colour, glistening there beautifully in the sun. Swirling it, the wine has just 13% alcohol and yet is quite readily forming some very noticeable tears on the side of the glass there. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? There really is a vivid, ripe, fresh red cherry note that comes straight out of the glass at me. There is a purity and an elegance to the fruit, although sitting behind it there are some sort of slight spice notes. Perhaps hints of development and perhaps some hints of sort of forest floor notes, some tiny touches, some tertiary notes, almost sort of hinting at truffles and earthiness. But really those aromas are just in the background with this beautiful bright fruit to the fore. So let's have a taste, shall we? The wine is light and fresh. There's a really vibrant acidity, and that vibrancy shows a lifted, lively red cherry fruit. My mouth is watering, that's the acidity, and some really fine tannins in there. And where my mouth's watering, I'm getting some sort of soft red fruit notes, hints of raspberry, hints of wild strawberry, some beautiful red fruit perfume notes. And then actually following from that, where there was earthiness on the nose, there's more a sort of a delicate chocolatiness. Some of that's a flavour characteristic, but I think actually predominantly it's a really fine powdery tannin. I mean, the wine is light to medium bodied. It doesn't have a huge weight of tannin and it doesn't have a massive weight of alcohol behind it. But the tannins that are there are giving a nice sort of powdery, almost sort of cocoa powder nature to the mid palate. The wine's freshness leaves my mouth watering and helps to give a nice length of sort of bright, juicy, mouth watering red fruit notes of cherries, hints of raspberries, on a finish that lasts really quite well. I think this is a wine for drinking now and over the next 2 to 3 years. I do wonder whether some of those tertiary notes I'm talking about might start to develop more into sort of forest floor, earthy, truffle notes as the wine spends a little time in bottle. But it doesn't have a huge structure for aging, and I think actually the vibrancy of its beautiful red fruits is probably best captured by consuming it at a fairly young age. So yes, a wine made from hand-picked, estate-grown fruit, fermented using a wild ferment from a top producer in a really good vintage. Price-wise, at the winery they sold us for 25 New Zealand dollars, so I'd expect that to be about £15 in the UK, possibly $20 in the US. But I will leave a link below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see how much it costs in your market and where it's available. But assuming that this is a wine that is available at those sort of prices, I really do think this is great value for money. In terms of the sort of wine it reminds me of, I think actually there's quite a lot of comparison to be made to the sort of enjoyment you get out of a Bourgogne Rouge coming from a top Burgundy producer. I did take a look at the Wine Searcher aggregated critics score. There isn't actually yet a score for this vintage of this wine. An aggregation of scores across the vintages comes out at 89, and I don't think that's a particularly good description of this. I think this is worth at least 90 points, probably 91 actually, because I think given a year or so in bottle, you will start to see slightly more of the tertiary side of Pinot Noir to complement the beautiful, bright red fruit that it displays. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be fantastic if you could press the like button. I'd really appreciate that. And if you're watching and enjoying my tastings, if you could consider signing up. Building my follower base would really help me to expand what I do with this channel. Similarly, if you have any friends you think might like to watch, please feel free to pass it on to them. I'd appreciate your support in that way as well. And if you have any comments, questions or suggestions, do pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to hear what you think about the tastings I'm doing, the wines I'm looking at, or anything else that relates to that. So thank you once again for joining me, and I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the near future. Till then, bye for now.